The Grammy Awards are about to take place February 2nd, and I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the greatest Grammy feats in music history, and that involves Stevie Wonder winning 3 Album of the Year awards in the 1970s with his 16th, 17th, and 18th albums. And this coincides with, or kind of parallels, Stevie Wonder's classic album period, which was an iconic 5-album run that included Music of My Mind, Talking Book, Inner Visions, Fulfilling This First Finale, and then finally, Songs in the Key of Life. This period lasted from 1972 to 1976. Now, another question, and maybe this is a topic for another day, but I had done a short video talking about who the greatest artists of every decade from 1950s to now is. For instance, with the 1950s, is it Frank Sinatra or is it Elvis Presley? In the 1960s, it's the Beatles, hands down. 1970s, I had Stevie Wonder, and I got a lot of pushback, and there are a lot of great contenders. So I can understand if somebody's opinion differs with Stevie Wonder being the greatest artist of the 1970s. The other contenders would be Led Zeppelin, Marvin Gaye, the Eagles, Elton John, Pink Floyd. There are a lot of other great artists of the 1970s, but there are reasons why I would pick Stevie Wonder as the greatest artist of the 1970s. And one of those reasons is that he won 3 Album of the Year Grammys. I mean, that kind of speaks to the quality of the work release by release, but he won 3 Album of the Year Grammys in the 1970s alone. Now, when we're talking about Album of the Year, Taylor Swift is now the queen of that category. She has surpassed, it was a 3-way tie for a while. It was Frank Sinatra, Stevie Wonder had tied Frank Sinatra when he won his 3rd, and then in the 1980s, Paul Simon from Simon & Garfunkel won his 3rd. His first was with Simon & Garfunkel as a duo, and then his 2nd and 3rd were solo Album of the Year Grammy wins. So for a long time, it was a 3-way tie between Frank Sinatra, Stevie Wonder, and Paul Simon. And then later on, decades later, here comes Taylor Swift, and she has actually won Album of the Year 4 times. So she now stands alone in having the most Album of the Year Grammy wins. And actually, this coming Grammys, she's nominated again. So she has a chance to pull away from the competition and becoming a 5-time winner if she wins this year with the next 3, again, having 3 wins. But when Stevie Wonder won his 3rd, he made it a 2-way tie with him and Frank Sinatra. And the context around Stevie Wonder's wins are so interesting as well. Like when you think about his career trajectory and the time that he won these awards. For instance, he was the first Black artist to win Album of the Year Grammy. But not only that, it happened so late in his career. A lot of people forget Stevie Wonder got started in the early 1960s on Tamla Motown. So at the time he was 10, 11 years old. But by the time he goes on this 5-album run, he was so well into his career, more than a decade into it, because when he first got his career started, he went by Little Stevie Wonder. And so he was like this child prodigy, right? It was interesting. He was a blind artist. Ray Charles was still in his prime around that time. So you have this 9, 10, 11-year-old Stevie Wonder making music and also being a multi-instrumentalist. He'd be on the keys. He would be on the harmonica. He could drum really well. Just look at that Questlove documentary, Summer of Soul. Stevie Wonder gets down on the drums. So Stevie Wonder had a lot of early success. Even in the 60s, he had serious hits. For instance, Fingertips in 1963 was Stevie Wonder's first hit. Again, this is 1963, so that makes him 12 years old. Fingertips hit #1, not just on the US R&B charts, but on the US Hot 100, the cross-genre pop charts. 1963, that was unusual for Black artists to have a #1 hit in the early 60s. And Stevie Wonder did that at, again, 12 years old. After that, Uptight, huge hit, 1965. So that would put him at like 14 years old. 2 years later, I Was Made to Love Her. That's one of my favorite early Stevie Wonder songs. Brilliant song, I Was Made to Love Her. Check that out. 1 year later, For Once in My Life, 1968. 1969, My Sherry Amore. So we're talking, some classics here. And again, those were just some of his biggest hits. He has some other lesser hits in between, but those were some of his biggest hits in the 1960s. And it should be noted that at this time, he was collaborating on songwriting with Sylvia Moy and Henry Cosby, who was also doing a lot of the production. So those were Stevie Wonder's early career frequent collaborators. You turn the page on the decade to the 1970s. Then you've got hits like Signed, Sealed, Delivered in 1970, If You Really Love Me in 1971, and then he gets into that 5-album classic period. So it's not like his career just got started and then he gets off to this Grammy award-winning album of the year start. No, this was, again, more than 10 albums into his career and more than a decade in. Again, hits in the 60s, turn the page to the 70s, you've got those early 70s hits, and then you've got the album Music From My Mind. And at this time, Stevie Wonder is starting to take the reins on songwriting and on production. So he's becoming much more of a visionary by this point, and through these 5 albums, he's executing brilliantly on that vision. So you've got Music of My Mind, very good album. It had Superwoman, it had Keep On Running. Then you have Talking Book 1 year later, 1973. That one has Superstition, one of Stevie Wonder's biggest hits, and it has You Are the Sunshine of My Life. So those 2 albums, Music of My Mind and Talking Book, very good albums, but it's the next 3 that will win the Grammys for Album of the Year. That's Inner Visions, Fulfilling This First Finale, and Songs in the Key of Life. Inner Visions, usually people will say Stevie Wonder's greatest album is either Songs in the Key of Life, which, I think that that's an obvious pick, or some, like a lot of publications and stuff, kind of the hipster picks will pick Inner Visions as Stevie Wonder's greatest album. Inner Visions had Higher Ground, it had Living for the City, great album. That was 1974. Also in 1974 was that next album, Fulfilling This First Finale. It had You Haven't Done Nothing, which was actually a #1 hit. It might not be one of Stevie Wonder's most famous songs today, but that was a #1. Again, this isn't just the R&B chart. This is the US Hot 100, #1 hit with You Haven't Done Nothing. And Fulfilling This First Finale also has Boogie On, Reggae Woman. Again, this album also won Grammy for Album of the Year, beating out Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark, Paul McCartney's Wings, Band on the Run. So there were some heavy hitters that year. And then 2 years later, Stevie Wonder releases kind of his magnum opus, right? Songs in the Key of Life, which, you rap hip hop fans, you might remember Tupac's All Eyes on Me and how that kind of feels like a greatest hits almost. Same thing with Notorious B.I.G.'s Life After Death. Those 2 albums from top to bottom, they're double albums like Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life, double album, right? 4 LPs, 4 vinyls or 2 CDs, but just stacked with hits from top to bottom. In fact, Songs in the Key of Life had multiple #1 hits. It has Sir Duke and I Wish. I think that I would say the most famous and the biggest legacy songs from this album are probably Sir Duke, I Wish, which features Stevie Wonder's clavinet. That's one of the instruments that he's kind of known for in the 70s, that right? Like for you Led Zeppelin fans who might remember Trampled Underfoot, well, Stevie Wonder kind of made that instrument famous in the 1970s. So Sir Duke, I Wish, Isn't She Lovely, and probably As. Those would probably be the 4 biggest songs from this album. My favorite song from the album is the album opener, Love's in Need of Love Today. Just a beautiful, gorgeous song. This album also has Pastime Paradise, which was sampled on Coolio's mega hit, Gangsta's Paradise. The excellent, funky instrumental Contusion is also on Songs in the Key of Life. It's really one of the greatest albums of all time. Again, this album is just stacked. And again, this earned Stevie Wonder his 3rd Album of the Year Grammy win. So this kind of capped off that classic period. Now, Stevie Wonder would go on to have other hits, even huge hits. Master Blaster was like in 1980. I Ain't Gonna Stand For It was also 1980. He had That Girl and Do I Do in 1982. That Girl, that was a huge song, speaks for itself. Do I Do was the one that Ja Rule sampled on Everybody That Be Living It Up. Stevie Wonder also had Ribbon in the Sky in 1982. In 1984, he had I Just Called to Say I Love You, which was a #1 hit. Think about how deep into Stevie's career this is. This is over 20 years into his career. #1 hit with I Just Called to Say I Love You. And the very next year, 1985, another #1 cross-genre #1 pop hit with Part-Time Lover. That was Stevie Wonder's final #1 hit. So yeah, incredible career, incredible stretch, and incredible Grammy feat when you consider Stevie Wonder won 3 Album of the Year awards in the 1970s. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about Stevie Wonder and about the Grammy category Album of the Year. I consider that to be the most important and the most significant Grammy category. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm going to continue to do kind of Grammy history and also category previews as we move towards the February 2nd date of the Grammy ceremony. Let me know your thoughts, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love music like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.